Welcome back to the Hearth. Allison, Kristen, Kate, and I are going to be hosting a conversation in 2 weeks, and we want to speak about transitions and about how our imprints show up in transitions. It's a huge topic in pre and perinatal somatics, and we'd like to have a conversation and share experiences in 2 weeks. So I'll have one of you start the conversation.
I can start. Um, I really learned about transitions working at the Beba Clinic, where I would notice when the kids would come into a session or leave a session, there was so much activation. And with some parents, I would suggest, planning an extra half hour to come into the session, or maybe planning an extra half hour to leave the session, but to really slow each moment down, to not push the child, to name what's happening when it's happening, to really receive the child every step of the way in that transition. Um, there was this one little boy where it was really hard for him to come into the session and settle down. And so we did that, just named every step of the way, really normalized it. As he was in his resistance, let him leave the room, come back in the room, and we made a game out of it so that we would all play that game. We're still coming, or we're here, or let's go back home. So we would go in and out. And then at the end of the session, once he got into the session, he didn't want to leave. And that was actually a harder transition where we really gave him all the time he needed. And every step of the way, we had to pause and he would just share this pain and grief and upset. And I felt as if the imprints of his birth trauma came out each step of the way and then settled. And it was such a deep healing process for him to have these parts named, to be held, to be acknowledged with how difficult and challenging this was, for him to leave, to transition from any place that he had a connection, almost not knowing if he's going to have that connection again after the transition, and what will that connection be like, and will it be safe? And so when he would come in the room, the first thing we did was to create safety exercises. And he would create pillows all around the room. We would build a wall, and we created this big boundary with no entry. And then inside that boundary, there was such a feeling of satisfaction and safety. But I'll never forget that little boy and what I learned about transitions and how healing it is to just go slow and acknowledge it each step of the way, and to be sensitive and receptive. There's so much healing beyond even knowing what the trauma is. But slowing down in the transition can help a child, be more spontaneous in going to, birthday parties, or having a child care person come be there. Any place where there's a stop of one connection and then a connection that's different. I hope that was clear. I
Yeah,
haven't.
yeah. I mean, I have a question for you, Allison. I mean, did you make an agreement with the guy that this young person that, okay, well, this is a safety exercise and we're going to build safety? Did you, was that a question you asked?
It came out of it. Like he felt unsafe. So, yeah, I did say, well, what can we do to create safety here? And so we explored different options. And then he chose the pillows, and we started building the walls, with
Nice.
furniture and pillows. And there was such a sense of containment and safety inside those walls.
Mhm.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I often educate families about transitions, and I have made all these little tiny videos for parents, and I will share, this is when there's usually when you go out somewhere or come back in or going to bed, the whole sequence of going to bed. And a lot of parents bring their children in because there's some really big activation there, or reluctance or resistance, and the parents are tired and they want peace, they want things to change. And so I educate people about the impact of birth and how there's a sequence and going to bed, brushing your teeth. What what happens there is often that's where our sequencing can start to show itself. And so I educate a lot of parents about it, and I have a little worksheet and stuff. Maybe I'll put that in um, our practices. But I see transitions a lot in my family, like especially because my husband and I are so different. I really had to get used to it because I'm like, oh, time to go. Oh, shoes are on. I'm out the door. I'm in the car waiting. And he's like putting on his shoes. And then he forgets something, goes back in the house. I'm like, oh my God, will you please get in the car? So it's like, I see it in myself a lot, like, how transitions are, you know, especially how I do the beginning phase of it and how he does the beginning phase of it. It's very different. But um, yeah, I think that's all I'll share for now.
Thanks, Kate. It's great to hear personal stories. I mean, there's something about transitions, and I know we were talking about it before this recording, but what are transitions? I mean, you can look at our entire sequencing and that transitions at almost every stage. And just the transition into starting something, the transition into ending something. But there's also transition right in the middle of going from a place of something, being stimulated in, excitation phase. And then there's a transition right when something completes down to, more of a settling place. And I think transitions are so important. I love the fact that you suggested this, Eileen. And the way I think about it, when I was first starting with the PPN, two of the parts that felt so important to me was the intention setting and the integration. Having really time to connect to our intention so that moving into the beginning, I can feel much more grounded, more, connected to myself and my own impulse, and have a foundation on which to push off and start something. And then similar on the other end of the integration of really feeling the completion and having time to be with what just happened before I move on to the next thing. And our culture doesn't offer that so much. And I think about, the children that I am with. You both, Alison, you were mentioning this before, of just how much, we're used to moving at a quicker pace, and we already know that children integrate at a much slower pace than we do as adults. And you can see that in the transitions of moving someplace or ending someplace where they actually need time, I think, one, to orient to what in the world's happening. I know we're used to, I'm used to, I should say, running around, getting things together and getting prepared for something. And in the midst of that, the children can be like, okay, something has just happened. The speed has increased depending on what our own imprints are. It might be different with your husband, Kate. Slow down.
Just speed up.
But there's how do they orient that something is about to shift. And how do they have time to include themselves and their connection to themselves in the midst of that shift? And I see that in children, of them really either protesting or trying to figure out, okay, I have some feelings about this, and needing someone to be with them in it so that they can, it makes me think of Ray saying, instill their inherent desire to cooperate with the transition that's about to happen. And yeah, so I think it's really important for transitions for children, but also us as adults. Even I know, working with families, of making some intentional space when we finish the day to orient to the completion of that day before we all of a sudden walk in the house or start to engage the children, to know that, okay, that work has completed, and now what's my intention now as I come into relationship with my partner or with the kids. And both of those things are so important for all the people who are involved. So I love this topic. I feel like we could talk about this for many, many times. I'll stop there.
I am appreciating what all of you are speaking about in slowing down. So, and slowing down is such an important part of our work, where we slow things down so that we can actually have the ability to perceive what is happening in the dynamics. And what came to mind for me, well, lots of things came to mind, because Kristin, I agree, this is such a rich thing to talk about. But it made me think about, I used to have this little crazy dog, Einstein. He was a little Chihuahua, and he would scream. When things got excited, he would run around in circles and scream. And so I would always have, in transitions, I would have a lot of disturbance, and I'd get tense and move around fast. And Einstein was such a perfect little barometer for it. And he would just start running around and screaming. He would just run back and forth in the house and scream. And it was such a good reflection, which prompted me, just for my own sanity, to start to slow down in transitions and to really pay attention to what was happening in my nervous system, to the point where I can leave for a trip now. I can make a transition and never go into adrenaline or any kind of life and death states as I transition. But it was really great to have an external reflection like that. Often children do that. Often children really mirror our frantic energy. And so I was so grateful to have the support of my crazy little dog to transform transitions for me, because I'm able to be, thanks to his help, to really witness myself. And when I can start to feel those sensations and feelings come up, I know how to slow down now. And I even know how to set myself up beforehand in a much slower way, so that I have time to be feeling those feelings from my history coming up at the same time as I can choose something different in the present.
Yeah. Thank you, Eileen. I'm thinking of our own dog who would react when my son would get hyper in transitions. He would start going crazy and running around. And my son learned to self-regulate, or to co-regulate, because he could see the barometer of the dog going nuts. And he was such a hyper kid. And he really learned to play with it. It was fun for him to slow himself down and then to see how the dog would react to that. So I love that story. And I'm also thinking of, for example, my sister was calling me. She had twins, and she didn't know what to do with her one of her twins who hated getting out of the bathtub. She would scream and cry and be very upset. and I shared with her, well, they were cesarean babies, and taking the baby out of the bathtub can also be a memory of being taken out of the womb. And she had to be taken, she had to be pushed aside, and the other one had to be rescued and taken out quickly, whereas it really was her turn to be taken out. And so there was upset there and fear there with the energy of how quick they had to be taken out of the womb. So I shared with my sister, every time you take a bath, it's an opportunity to repair that experience, to share with her what happened, and that she has a right to have these feelings, and it's so good that she's expressing it, and that now we can heal that place. She can take all the time she needs, and they can take turns coming out of the bathtub. One time it's one twin coming out first, the other time it's the other, because they would always take it together. And then the other place was transitioning out of the house. It was the same thing. This particular twin never wanted to get her coat on, didn't want to leave the house, and would cry and scream about it. And so again, I said, take it a step at a time, explain to her it's very similar to the bath experience, and that they can take all the time they need. And it worked. My sister had a great experience with that, and it really helped her twins heal and get used to transitions.
Wow, what a beautiful story, Allison, and a great illustration of how our birth imprints can impact transitions. So really illustrative. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. It was fun to be able to give my sister something she can do with that, because it was really overwhelming for her. And the twins took it in. I mean, they loved hearing about their birth, and that this is what happened, and this isn't what she would have wanted to have happen, and just worked with them with it.
Nice.
So beautiful. I think, there's something about really connecting to where it is in our transitions it's happening to. It's, I was sitting with how I am at the beginning of something versus how I am at the end. Though interestingly enough, that both of them, I elongate both sides of it. Like, it's hard for me to begin, but it's also hard for me to leave. So it's that transition part I tend to elongate, but for very different reasons. For me, part of it in terms of birth was I didn't want to come out in the field in which I was being birthed. Like, so I was resisting actually coming out. So I can feel how that initiates my resistance to starting something. But once I get going, it's much easier. And then similarly, which is so interesting to think about, that the ending part is what happens after my birth. I also was very significant that at the end of events, I don't usually want them to end either, because of the separation that I experienced afterwards.
Yeah, thank you for that, Kristin. I have learned something new about my sequence. my transitions, which, after 30 years of studying this stuff, you'd think, oh, maybe I've figured stuff out, but it's interesting how um, I learned something new. And it was because my son, he was really upset with me. He was like, you plan, you're always planning, you plan everything. And like, this is one of my strengths, the preparation phase before you begin something. And it struck me, as a baby for about a month before I was born, I had cord impingement, so I had to keep myself off my cord. And I think I planned my escape. I think I thought about it a lot. Like, well, I think I was just very focused on planning on how I was going to be born. So, I mean, that I thought my son was probably irritated him because he didn't do any of that. Probably didn't need to, and it's true. I'm a big planner. In fact, that's one of my, if I need a dopamine hit of some kind, I'll plan something because it gives me that feel good feeling, like, and for people who have any kind of life death connection to any part of the sequence, there's going to be strengths or challenges that are pretty big survivor type things. And I just was tickled that I got to learn something new about my whole sequence because I hadn't really thought about it. But yeah, I tend to have a 5-year strategy and the 5-year plan person, and I've got I prepare really well for most things, and it's one of those parts of the sequence that I really like. So kudos to having people get irritated with you when you're a part of the sequence.
But it's also good to know where we might need some support too. Like when we are aware of how it affects our transitions, then we can invite in the support to help us through those moments.
It's true.
You're going to say something, Eileen.
Oh, I was just going to mention, transitions can be small transitions, like a, you know, leaving for work or school or going to bed. So we have lots of transitions throughout the day, but then we also have life transitions. So human beings are very polyrhythmic. We have really big arcs, and then we have these little short things throughout the day. And so, you know, really understanding how I do transitions is so helpful in throughout the day, but also looking at larger arcs of transitions in life. And it starts with conception and birth, but then it's even things like graduating high school or going to school in the first place or getting married or moving or new job. So there are both big and small transitions, and it's always helpful to understand our imprint structure around transitions.
Well, we're hoping that you all will come to the conversation in 2 weeks on April 21st and share what your reflections are about how you make transitions or how your family does transitions and or how you see transitions, and maybe we'll engage in a little bit more story about how our earliest experiences impact how we move through things or not. So we'll see you next week. No, 2 weeks. 2
Be
weeks.
done.